Yeah, our conference was a success because of Anastasia and our great team, and we can already see the great work that they have done to get this conference to where it is, quite perfect. And so I think we have 3 presentations, allowing 15 minutes or thereabout, and then we can have a discussion thereafter, questions, comments. And so I will invite Christina to get us started. You might want to introduce yourself in a slightly more detail as you make your presentation.
Thank you, Daniel. Just first to check that everyone can see slide, and that's the first one.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can see
okay.
It, yeah.
Okay. Great. So my name is Cristina Asenjo Palma, and I am a lecturer in social work, community, and youth work at the University of Wolverhampton. What I'm going to present is based on my PhD research, which I haven't finished yet. I'm still trying to write it and finish the writing. And so this is kind of like a summary of all my findings. And I have to say that I've been trying to make this presentation to last for 15 minutes, and the 3 times that I tried, the 3 times I failed. So I try again, and hopefully I won't go over the time. So I don't know how many of you have faced a similar question, but something that happened to me in my practice is that I either work in organizations in which the focus of the work was focusing on what can people improve by themselves, how they can improve their own living conditions, maybe their employability or their social relationships, or I either work in organizations or I was part of activist groups in which everything was more about trying to change the system, or kind of like having a more impact at the structural level. And I never knew, every time that I was in one approach or the other, I always wondered, oh, there is something missing in here. So that what kind of like motivated me to start this PhD research. And what I focus is on 2 approaches, the asset-based approach and the right-based approach. And by asset-based approach, I mean approaches which focus on helping people provide self-help solutions by identifying their needs and their assets, their skills, and taking actions to improve the community services. And by the right-based approach, I mean approaches that focus on helping people identify their rights and take actions to pressure duty bearers who are responsible for the protection and fulfillment of those rights. And I have 2 case studies. There were 2 community development projects in Scotland that were either closer to the asset-based approach or close to the right-based approach. They work with geographical communities that face socioeconomic disadvantage, and both projects were community-led. And a way of understanding these 2 approaches is, for the asset-based approach, generally the premise is that people can make changes at the personal level, and that scales up to a community level, and that the hope would be that at some point you will achieve wider social change. While for the right-based approach, the premise is more like what people can achieve by themselves is quite limited if the structures don't change. So we do need to change things more at the structural level to achieve some sort of systemic change that can then benefit the community and then ultimately will benefit the individual. And what I wanted to look is, okay, how these 2 approaches have an influence on well-being, and by well-being, I mean people's material living conditions, or social dimension of well-being, which includes support and relationships and sense of community, safety, and also personal dimension. What's people's sense of life satisfaction, or what's the mental health, physical health, their access to information, and skills, etc. So what I found so far. So what I'm going to do is just to highlight the main, because I'm comparing these two approaches, I'm going to highlight the main contrasting difference, where I found that it was more interesting. So in terms of effects on material well-being, something that I found more interesting was that the rights-based approach tends to have more observable and objective effects on material living conditions. So the approach helps community improve those material conditions, and that was in the case study that I studied in particular. It was on housing rights, and they did manage to improve their housing conditions and as a side effect their income, because the renovation of the houses made them basically allow them to spend less money on their bills. While the asset-based approach, it was interesting because it didn't have that, what I found is it didn't have that observable effect on material living conditions, but people participating in the project perceived that their material conditions had improved. And it was because they had this sense of safety net. They had a community in which they could rely on if they experienced problems. So even though their housing or material conditions hadn't improved that much, they felt that there was that support, that they could go to the organization and they could receive that help if they needed. And in terms of social well-being, and there are many different indicators. I can't go through all of them because then I will be presenting for the whole hour. But just as a general view, like from support, social activities, community facilities. So what it kind of like struck me the most, it was the asset-based approach had positive impact across a wider range of indicators, but on participants. So people had to be actively involved in the asset-based approach to benefit from it. And it did have a very positive effect on social activities. It managed to create lots of activities for the community. People were using greener spaces that they didn't use before. People were using community facilities that they didn't use before. They felt more supported, and their sense of community safety, the perception of community safety, improved. But only on those participants. I couldn't find any signs of that had also transcended to the wider community. Whilst the rights-based approach, it had an impact on a smaller range of indicators, but their effect transcended the wider community. So not only the people who were involved in the project benefited from the approach. So community residents that did not participate in the project also felt that they were more supported in the sense that they knew that there was a community of residents who were willing to put a fight and defend their rights as well, and they didn't need to participate. They also had more access to facilities thanks to the work of those community residents who more actively engaged in the approach, and their perceptions of community safety as well improved. And in terms of personal well-being, which goes from health, information, skills, relationships, and sense of happiness and life satisfaction, what it was interesting in here, the comparative impact, it was both approaches had a similar impact on the people involved. So those more actively involved felt that their skills had improved. They felt much more confident. Their information, also they felt that they were much more informed about what was going on in the community. And in the case of the rights-based approach, they were more informed about their rights and their entitlements. It also had a positive impact on their mental health and life satisfaction. And it was because both projects help people and participants in particular, they give them a sense of purpose. So there was a meaning, they had something to do, there was a goal to achieve, and that made them feel much better with themselves. But the different effect, it was, again, the right-based approach also had that slight effect on the wider community. So it did help the health of the community residents that were not involved in the project, And they also felt happier, or they had felt that their sense of life satisfaction had improved because their material conditions had improved. On the downside, the right-based approach, what it had that sort of negative effect on participants because they were challenging very powerful duty bearers, and there was always the fear that this is going to come back at me, and at some point I'm going to be evicted, or I'm just going to suffer some sort of consequences for complaining or for actively challenging powerful institutions. So I have this effect on well-being. But what about what the wider range of organizations might say about these two approaches? So I decided to approach other community organizations beside these two case studies, these two projects, that I'd identified their approach as helping people take actions to improve their lives and provide self-help solutions in line with the asset-based approach, or that they focused more on helping people take actions to challenge unjust structures and secure social rights in line with the rights-based approach. And what I found is that both approaches, the asset-based approach and the right-based approach, had advantages and disadvantages. So some of the disadvantages of the asset-based approach, and what my interview participants spoke about the most, it was, yes, it works for the people involved, but not for the wider community. So for instance, we have Reps, a practitioner in a LGBTQ organization, and she was saying, I think for the community that I work with, which has faced a lot of discrimination over the years, this kind of a strategy, the self-help or the asset-based, kind of help them get through the day, but it doesn't change anything. And similarly, in a similar line, it was this idea that is more like a firefighting or a sticking plaster effect. So yes, you help people improve their lives or feel better with themselves, but you are not really doing anything to solve the bigger problem because the structures remain unchallenged. On the plus side, the asset-based approach was thought to be much more direct and simple. It's just easier to achieve changes. It's easier to help people improve areas of their lives, and that's important for them. And as a result, there are visible outcomes. So organizations following these approaches can actually, they can find the evidence. Oh yeah, this is working, and I can show you all these positive effects. So again, as Brett said, well, if you are doing things that are more immediately gonna have an impact on your life, that's something that you will feel the benefits a lot quicker. If we go to the rights-based approach, the people, the interviewees, what they spoke the most about the disadvantages was the problem of here and now. So yes, campaigning and our advocacy or trying to make a more systemic change has that wider impact, but it takes longer. It is more difficult to achieve. And what happens when you want to help people right now? Can you wait for that long that takes to achieve those changes? So as Alan, for instance, one of my participants said, we want to help people now and not in 20 years' time. Another difficulty or another of the disadvantages that I spoke about before is this idea that it has negative consequences. So for some of the organizations that they were involved in a rights-based approach, their funding was at risk. In England, where I'm based now, even some charities are prevented for campaigning, and that's something they are legally banned. They cannot do any campaigning. So and some organizations that they try, they always fear that either the funding or the participants are going to suffer the consequences. And some of the participants in the rights-based approach, they did suffer some of the negative consequences of being too challenging. On the plus side, the rights-based approach, it is thought to be much more transformative because it targets the root causes. It liberates people from blame in the sense that people know that they are not the cause of the problems, it's how the system works. And in that sense, is sometimes with the asset-based approach, what it happens is like people feel like, oh, I'm not able to improve my situation. Is it that I'm not working it hard enough, or what is it? Is it like I don't have the skills, or what is it? While with the rights-based approach, everyone knows, well, it's not me the problem, it's the way that the system works. And another positive is that they work when they are successful, and when communities manage to engage in a right-based approaches and the duty bearers respond to it, they actually are able to contribute to that wider social change. And I think we've seen that throughout history, right? So that's one of the advantages of the rights-based approach. So, given this, I guess that the question is like, okay, so both approaches have positives and negatives. So, and it seems that the asset-based approach it works better, helping communities, people, individual people right now across a wider range of well-being indicators, while the rights-based approach, it has a more universal effect. It transcends to the wider community, but it takes longer and it's more difficult to achieve. So what do? Do we prioritize the well-being of the wider community, maybe in the future? Or do we prioritize the well-being of project participants and the people that we are able to engage with, but now in the present? So given this, many of my participants said, oh, maybe we need to combine both of these approaches. And yes, ideally, maybe this is what should we be doing. So, and they saw it in a way that, well, maybe these two approaches can be, it's not like either we go for one or the other. It's just we swap between them. Maybe we need to go to that asset-based approach in order to gather the energy, to gather the community support, and to gather all that kind of like set space, self-care, that then it can allow us to go to the right-based approach and then go back to the asset-based approach and do kind of like in a circular way. But so in reality, say again, sorry.
Christina, you can take 2 minutes.
Okay, yeah, I'm about to finish right now. Thank you. In reality, community organizations and especially small grassroots organizations, they find really difficult to combine both approaches because either they lack the capacity and the resources and the skills. So these two approaches have like very different skills and they require people to be able to focus on different areas. Or maybe they also find difficult to combine both approaches if their funding requirements prevent them from campaigning or prevent them from providing certain services. So again, that was a tricky thing that organizations were preventing organizations from combining both. And I guess again is the decision of, well, it was an ideological decision to some of my participants, like, well, it depends on how you think change is achieved. And if you think change is achieved by first targeting at structural level, then that's it. And if you think change is achieved by going from the individual up, then that's the way that you want to go for. So again, we have this question of like, okay, if that's the case, then the organizations cannot combine both approaches. What do we do? Do we still have to prioritize one or the other? Do we look for creative ways or networking in which some organizations, we make sure that both approaches are being represented? And I have to say that so far, there are much more asset-based type of initiatives than right-based initiatives. So yeah, that's me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christina. And life would have been easy if it was just a question of either or, but we don't have that privilege at times, given the extent of the needs and the issues we have to deal with in communities. Well, I noticed that Hannah is also discussing largely in the same area. So let's listen to Hannah, and then we can also put the questions now in the chat for them to be reflecting on. At least Christina can start reflecting on. So Anna Kiba, you have the space. 15 minutes.
Hello. Hi, can you hear me?
Sure.
Hi. Yeah, thank you so much, Christina. That was wonderful. And it feels like our sessions flow really nicely between each other. Because I'm basically reflecting. So my name is Hannah Kirby. I live in Edinburgh in Scotland, and I have been working for about the last 5 years, along with Colin, who you'll see, who's also listening here, with Inspiring Leith, which, yes, is in Leith in Edinburgh. And I'm basically reflecting on what it's like to shift between these different approaches as a community worker. So I've just started a master's at the University of Glasgow in community development. So I'm starting to reflect on kind of some of my experiences as a worker over the last 5 years. So I will introduce where we've been working. This is Cableswynd House, or the Banana Flats in Leith. And Leith is a very distinct part of Edinburgh. You'll be able to see on the map. It's kind of got its own identity and community spirit. And these flats were built between 1963 and 65 as part of a post-World War II housing scheme. And they're owned by the local authority, Edinburgh Council, and almost everybody who lives there is a council tenant. They replaced Victorian tenements, which were overcrowded. That's kind of flats, the more kind of traditional flats that you would see in a lot of Edinburgh and Scotland. And according to some residents that we've worked with who've been there for a long time, initially when everybody moved in, it was a really wonderful place to live. A lot of kind of neighbours all moved in together, children played out together, people felt very safe, and it was a really good place to live. Unfortunately, there's a lot of ways I could introduce the Banana Flats now. It has quite a lot of stigma. It's become known a bit for kind of a history of drug dealing and drug use, and it kind of tops Edinburgh's multiple deprivation scale, which just means that there are people who struggle a lot in the Banana Flats, and it can be a difficult place to live. So we started working in the building in 2018. I'm a community worker with Inspiring Leith, which is a partnership between a faith-based housing charity called Bethany Christian Trust and Inspiring Scotland. And it's part of Inspiring Scotland's Link Up programme, which is broadly an assets-based project. So our remit is to get to know people in the community and help them to set up groups which are going to be of benefit to themselves and the wider community, that are peer-led and free or low cost, and are supported by us as workers through advice, practical support, small parts of funding, and through ongoing care and conversations and spending time together. Our work in Cableswynd House has sort of been an experiment in taking this approach within a block of flats which houses about 1,000 people within a much bigger community of Leith. We decided to actually get involved because I was at a local neighbourhood meeting and the police had said that they had just seized an awful lot of drugs and weapons from the building, and but that there was no residents group or association to kind of build trust and build community safety in the area. For the first couple of years, we actually we just spent probably just a few hours a week, along with lots of other things that we were doing, just getting to know residents in the block. We would sometimes set up a little stall with tea and coffee and cake and just chat to whoever was passing. We also were introduced to individual residents through other workers that we knew in the community. One person that we got to know initially was called Kirsty, who has lived there for about 20 years, and she used to be involved in the Residents Association. And she's one of these amazing women who has her own children and basically runs the whole world. You know, she's helpful with everything. She knows lots of people. She really cares about her community. And she was actually seemed quite burnt out by her experiences of being very overburdened by the residents group before and all the work that involved. But she still had a lot of ideas of things that would bring her a lot of joy. And one of those was to start gardening in the grounds around the building. So we just started helping her. And this was our first year's efforts. It was quite small, but it was really nice to spend time with her. And through that, we got to know other residents and chatted to them and planted potatoes with the children, things like that. This is a harvest from the first year of the garden. Alongside doing things like this, at the same time, we spent a lot of time just drinking cups of tea or coffee with people and visiting them in hospital or offering that kind of one-to-one support. And we were particularly fortunate in this approach to have encouragement from our contact at Inspiring Scotland, who is Mariam Ali, who's actually on this call. And she really encouraged us to believe that even though it can look very small and unimpressive, the work that we put in building this trust and relationships between ourselves and between the residents was incredibly valid. When the COVID-19 pandemic started, residents in the building were particularly affected by not being able to get outside at all, really, as green space that they had access to was shared. We stayed in touch with people that we knew in the building, calling them on the phone, going for walks when we were able to. We did a socially distanced stall in the garden. You can see me down there with my sort of mask and various seeds and packets. And here's some sunflowers that we were giving out because people had said they'd like to do some growing on their balconies. So we did things like that. And again, that was kind of a chance to just stay in touch with people, really. Throughout the pandemic and during this time, we did a lot of learning about well-being and mental health and trauma-informed approaches, as we had started being provided with clinical supervision with a psychotherapist by Inspiring Scotland. Many people struggled a lot with the isolation and fear brought about by multiple lockdowns and perhaps losing people in the pandemic. And those with children were particularly under pressure. At the same time, actually, for ourselves, supporting people one-to-one, often from, my bedroom when my children were in the living room, calling people and hearing a lot of difficult things, my own mental health started to suffer and I became very anxious. However, I wanted to mention this because I received a lot of support and understanding from my employers through this time, and I learned a great deal about my own limitations and the value of sharing these and being realistic about what I could actually offer, but actually learning that offering empathy and understanding and not being afraid of others' distress or mental health problems, if we can do this over a long period of time, that can be extremely valuable for people. One person told us at one point, I feel like with you and Colin there, I have somebody on my side. I think if I hadn't had that support and care from my employers, I might have found the work too difficult. But because I was able to have that support and understanding, I was actually able to carry on this work and have eventually seen a lot more fruit from it. So that's just a point about really the importance of care within our organisations. Through the relationships that we made and strengthened during the pandemic, after things opened up again, some people had some really good ideas for groups and activities that would help their own well-being and the community. For example, an English group, and somebody had an idea for Zumba. So this lady, Marai, she approached us because a neighbour had told her that we were nice, and we helped her to get this started. And during 2021, she set up this group. However, this is when, as we started continuing doing creative, interesting activities with the community, we were hearing more and more about people's distress and concern about the conditions of their housing, that it wasn't adequate. People were experiencing mold, neglect to the building, the lifts were breaking, which was having a really big impact, especially on people with disabilities and small children. And this was when we actually made contact with Claire at a charity called Making Rights Real. I think Christina probably knows her because I think this was potentially one of the case studies. So she had been instrumental in a project which used human rights with residents in a housing scheme just down the road from us, and had called on the council to invest in bringing the buildings up to scratch with great success. As we discussed taking on a rights-based approach, for myself as a worker, I felt quite scared about moving towards a rights-based approach because we had been put kind of so much emphasis on supporting people through their problems with their mental health. I was really scared about suggesting that people started taking on the council, and you know, what if it caused more problems for them when they already had a lot of problems? However, we really felt that it was important to really listen to what people were saying about their living conditions, and we started doing more door knocking and asking people how they felt about the building. Out of this, the beginnings of a residents group emerged. One resident, Stacey, had experienced mold in her flat for 6 years and eventually only got it dealt with by calling her local councillor in tears. She had been a part of a successful community forum in Birmingham and suggested we try it here. So in May 2022, we held our first Cableswind Community Forum, which involved MSPs, MPs, other political representatives, the police, other organisations involved in working in the area, along with the landlord itself, which is the council. The agenda was set by the residents, and we set a group agreement saying that everybody was equal in the space, and residents should be given priority to be listened to because they were giving their time for free to make the community better. So during this time, we began really in earnest a rights-based approach with the residents, doing a survey covering points that we already knew about and listening for other priorities. Residents designed this themselves, and a few of us have been carrying it out. We will use this as a baseline and monitor whether things are improving over time. We shared some of the findings and pictures at one of the meetings a couple of months ago. And the most recent meeting, the council, to our astonishment, already announced that they were going to listen to residents' concerns. They were going to invest money in the building. They were going to try to address the mold. They were going to address all of the neglected areas and all the lifts breaking, and that the money was already in place. So this was a much better response, much more quickly than we expected. And I think it probably has built on the previous work done with Edinburgh Council on the rights-based approach. So our task now is to kind of continue to take this rights-based approach and monitor whether things really are getting better for the residents and make sure that their experiences are put front and centre over time. So rather than shining an unhelpful light on everything that was wrong with their lives, which is what I feared about taking on a rights-based approach, affirming that people shouldn't be living in these conditions is incredibly powerful for their well-being. I'll end with a good illustration of where the work is at now. On Friday, just gone, some of the residents wanted, in the kind of assets-based way, to hold a fun day, just for fun, to bring all the families together. We had a bouncy castle booked, but because of the crazy Scottish weather, we had to cancel it all. Apart from, we still did some food and some children's activities just in the foyer next to the lifts. They really don't have very much space in this place, but we ended up with about 30 people, children playing. It was really fun. So it was a good example of the assets-based approach in action, but then also one conversation I had with a mother who had been living there for 13 years. She explained to me her conditions in her house and how she feels trapped and the mold and all of the problems that she's had. When I listened to her and affirmed that it's her human right to have adequate housing, she looked up at me and looked quite surprised and looked as though somebody was finally really listening to her about her conditions, and that she shouldn't be experiencing that. So the work is ongoing. As we tidied up with an incredible group of multicultural women, some of whom you see here. The song "I'm Walking on Sunshine" came on, and we had a good dance next to all the lifts that we complain about to the council all the time. So we'll continue to support the residents to make their voices heard, while also supporting them to do what is already in their considerable power and skills to build community and make the flats a good place to grow up and live in.
Thank you very much, Hannah. And